The experience of African Americans in America has long been chronicled in art forms. I'm talking about through dance, visual art, through oral traditions, and through music. Gospel music is the natural recordings of the hopes and the dreams of Africans who came to this continent enslaved. It is continued from the first person ever having hope, ever thinking they would have freedom, to today. Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. serves as executive producer, host, and writer of Gospel. Gospel is a 4-hour docuseries. It's going to explore the rich history of Black spirituality through sermon and through song. Gospel premieres February 12th and 13th on WHRO Public TV right here in Hampton Roads. So today we have invited our own set of experts, minister and pastor Peggy Britt, Senior Vice President of Capitol Records at Norfolk State alumnus will be joining us, Mr. Phil Thornton. He'll be joining us by phone. And Norfolk State Assistant Director of Choral Activities, Professor Terry Butler. Welcome all. We are glad that you have come on board with us. We'll get things started because this hour is going to go quickly. I'll start with you, Pastor Britt. Why has music been so important to frame a sermon? Why music and sermons? Why do they go together?
Those two things are kind of meshed. Even the preaching tradition is very, very musical because at the end of some messages, you hear what preachers call the hoop, and they go into just singing the message added to what they've already capitalized on in the sermon. So it's a part of who we are as Black people, I believe, to put those two things together and make it work.
Make it work. You know about that hoop, Professor Butler?
I know a little bit about it.
So
Somewhat.
that's actually taught in seminary, right?
I believe to a certain degree.
It's a fancy word for it.
I don't know if they I don't know if they teach it, but I do know that that it is such a creative way of getting the messages across. I think, and to go back into our culture and capitalize on that so that people even have a deeper understanding of the message.
Okay. The scriptures command us to sing. That's what the word says. All right. For instance, in Psalm 102, the word says, "Serve the Lord with gladness. Come to his presence with singing." My question is, why is it that church is always the first place that so many singers, both secular and gospel singers, why is the church the place they've started? For instance, why hasn't it been the family basement, or why hasn't it been the chorus at school? Why does it seem like it's always been the church?
I think the church is a safe place in many instances, not all, but in many instances, safe place where families are there with their children, and then at times, and especially if it's that type of church, pardon me, pastors and ministers are encouraging the youth to sing, and then you'll find that young talent at a 5, 6, 7-year-old age range, and then from there they are able to express themselves without any sometimes preconceived judgment, not like a talent show in a high school or middle school, but in the church. Oh, go ahead, sing, baby, or that kind of thing, so right. And so they can do no wrong, but then all of a sudden you discover, oh my, this is a talent. Yeah.
Pastor Peggy, what do you think?
Absolutely. Those when those experiences start in the church, there is a soulish component that goes along with that talent that you just don't get in other venues. So when you talk about singers and the singers that we know started in the church scenario, there's some of the most soulful singers that we hear, and spirit connects with spirit. So when that person has really honed that talent and mixed it with that soul component, it touches people.
It does.
And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to make an impact with people with these messages.
We do. Joining the program, we do have Phil Thornton, Senior Vice President of Capitol Records. Welcome to the program, Phil.
Hey, how you doing? Afternoon. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Amazing.
Wonderful. Well, I've been sitting here with Minister Peggy Britt and Assistant Choral Director Terry Butler. And my last question to them was, why do you think so many talents come out of the church? You want to add to that discussion?
I think they did a good job. I mean, it is a safe place. I mean, but it's been such I'd say a training ground for so much amazing talent over the years. When you think about just some of our favorite singers, I don't care if you're Aretha Franklin to Mariah Carey, like they all have roots in the church. But it was just a way for them to express themselves and to give God the glory. So yeah, I echo everything that's been said by Pastor Britt and Mr. Butler. So yeah.
Wonderful.
And just let me add, as a recording artist myself, it really I can remember the days when I was playing piano for my church. I can remember the days when I was in this little thing called the Sunshine Band. I can remember those days and how the development of the talent that I was given was developed in those small places. However, I gained some confidence from being able to, as Terry alluded to, being able to do that in a safe place. And so, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is a safe place.
That's what Missy Elliott said when she shouted you out on national television when she was talking about how you taught her harmonies. That was in church in a safe place.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. I couldn't get myself together.
You saw it live?
No. So, listen, it was on TV, and somebody called me and said, Pharrell and Missy are talking about you. And I thought it was a joke, man. I hung up on them. And then my phone kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And then somebody sent me the video. I said, oh, my God.
And then you believed it.
Absolutely. But I had no idea, because even though Missy was in the choir, we didn't operate like together. I wasn't sitting down saying, do this and do that. But evidently in those rehearsals, there was something that she caught on to that helped her to develop what she has as well.
Absolutely. I asked nationally known gospel artist Jacqueline Carr, what is meant when we say catching the Holy Spirit?
Pretty much the Holy Spirit coming upon you, because there's always evidence of the Holy Spirit and the Holy Ghost when you are filled, when it touches you, because sometimes you feel it, sometimes you can sense it. And different changes in your life, maybe conviction becomes even stronger for you, whatever the case may be. But
yeah, so now this is going to get a little, but I want all three of you to be honest with me on this one, okay? So, Professor Butler, recently there was a huge outroar about some folks catching the Holy Spirit in an unusual way. This was with Bishop William Murphy and his church. They were swag surfing, if you remember. This is on New Year's Eve, right?
Yes.
Some say, well, you know what? If this is saving souls, so be it. And they say 150 people were saved that night, right?
Okay.
If this is saving souls, so be it. Other people say, you know what? This is the church trying to look like the world instead of the world trying to look like the church, right?
Right.
And it's interesting because Bishop William Murphy, he's a pastor and he preaches the word. And he's a recording artist, right?
Yes.
So your students here at Norfolk State University, how do they feel about the traditional versus the contemporary? What do you hear from them?
I'm hearing a lot of times that some were accepting of what took place at that interesting service, and then some were not. I think with the change of times, are we still trying to keep the reverence or the sense of countenance of that particular house, but then what lords over that? What makes that rule at that point? Things are changing every day. Schools have changed. prayers in school, prayers not in school. Some
But the
say
question
pledge,
is, should the church change?
right, and that's the point. But then some churches, if you don't change, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but then you're not going to hear babies crying. You're not going to have that youth movement at
Right.
times.
Mhm.
But then some places you will. I think it depends on then the energy of that minister.
Phil, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts there. I mean, full disclosure, I am friends with Bishop Murphy, and I worked with him previously when I was at Sony. I personally, I'm fine with it. I think it's a way to attract youth and engage the current younger audience. Like, and the only thing I would say I would probably have done differently is maybe not use the original song vocals and maybe just done the instrumental.
Right.
But I understand the intention, the heart of behind what Bishop Murphy was trying to do. But to me, I'm completely fine with it. I feel like that's a big challenge with the church. We have to find ways to evolve without, I get it, we don't want to dilute this, the value and the morals and principles, but we have to find a way to speak to a younger audience. And I was, again, fine with it. I wish it was the instrumental being used, but all good. But again, I swag, sir, so I'm not going to say to him be a hypocrite. Say I'm offended by what happened in the church, though. But for me, it was good. I thought it was fine.
We also spoke to another well-known force, not just here in Hampton Roads, but across the nation, Patrick Riddick of Divine Worship. I asked him his feelings about Bishop William Murphy and how he approaches the traditional versus the contemporary songs and activities that are going on in the church. And like I said, I asked him about his approach.
I'm more of a bridge. That's not necessarily the style of worship I look for in church, but to that, I believe that everyone has to do what works for their house.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people, that may never be churchy in the traditional sense. And the Bible does say he that winneth souls must be wise. So I'm just going to attribute that to Pastor Murphy trying to find a different kind of bait and tackle to go fishing for souls. And if it works for him, it works for him.
That's exactly right. Pastor Peggy, your thoughts on it?
Oh boy. This is a very, very deep question. And having a soundbite for me, probably not the best thing, but I am a stickler for staying on message, especially when it comes to the gospel. I don't want anybody to lose sight of, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. I don't want anybody to lose sight on that and be sidetracked by anything that we might do to take away from that. And I'm not saying that's what he did. I haven't even seen it. I don't even know what swag surfing is.
We're gonna show you.
Yeah, please show me. But because I want to stay aware. However, as Patrick said, sometimes we find other ways to present the gospel that allows people to come to Christ, because that's what the gospel is for.
Mm-hmm.
So if that came from heaven, then he's good.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't, then I don't know. And if they really got saved and not just emotionally charged by the atmosphere.
But could emotionally charged for the atmosphere lead to maybe later down the road some sincere safeness?
Yeah, well, maybe.
You sound doubtful.
Well, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because when those kinds of things come about emotionally you can be derailed. But when those kinds of things come by way of spiritually, then usually that's not going to get derailed later on down the road. You understand what I'm saying?
Point taken. What you want to say, Professor?
And I agree with everything that everyone has said. But then again, as I was saying earlier about evolving, early in the church, allegedly, they're saying that Philip Bliss in the late 1800s was one of the first pieces of paper that was written on paper around 1874, 1875 from Philip Bliss, the famous hymn writer of It Is Well With My Soul. Then from there in the 1920s, Tommy Dorsey. All right, so we go from those two manners of music, but then the way church was done then is different in the 40s and 50s.
Mhm.
Then now the way church is done now is different from then.
Exactly.
Some think that once you put a beat on a song, like a Kurt Franklin particular piece of literature, once you put a beat on it, now it's no longer sacrilege, if you will. It's different from sacred literature.
Yeah, you're
So-
right. You're right. And when as long as those things, again, as long as the gospel stays pure,
Mhm.
in my view,
Mhm.
as long as the gospel stays pure, whatever kind of dress you want to put on it, whatever kind of hat you want to put on it, uh, should accentuate it and not overpower it to the point where people are not understanding what that is.
I have a question for the group. Where can you find influences of gospel music in secular forms? Now, I want you to think about that. I want you all the way in on that. But first, here's what Jacqueline Carr had to say.
I would say one in particular whom I know we all loved her voice, and she just was amazing. That was Whitney Houston, clearly and obviously. We know her background and her growing up in church and singing gospel, even recorded gospel songs and things of that nature. So I would definitely have to say Whitney Houston.
Bill, are you walking around and you're, in the world? Do you see influences of gospel music all around you?
Honestly, not the way I once did. I mean, nowadays it's just a little different as far as what I see is, I see some influences online, but not compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I would see a lot more influences in the mainstream as far as aspiring artists. But as far as established artists, like Jacqueline mentioned, Whitney's a great example. Kelly Price is a great example. Faith Evans. There's a number of people I could say that, mainstream artists of kind of previous generations. But when I think about today's landscape, you don't feel or see that influence as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I agree.
As much.
I
Mhm.
agree. When I not last year, year before last, I did a concert. Well, it was kind of more like a production called Grassroots Gospel. And I did some research because I wanted to use the quartets in this area to sing music that I had written. And it was a great success. Kerry Smith was a part of that, executive producer for that. He's local, but he's just fantastic. And what happened was I did a whole lot of research from behind quartet music.
Yes. Yes.
The stuff I found out was astounding.
Such as?
Listen, when Ray Charles did I got a woman way over town, she good to me. And oh man, see, I should have had that stuff at my fingertips. But there was another gospel artist who took that and just ran with it, and it's amazing how, as the gentleman has said, that influence is not as much now as it was back in those days. But you could draw a straight line from Ray Charles to the church.
Mhm.
You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Mhm.
From Marvin Gaye to the church.
Mhm.
Even as late as Anthony Hamilton. Y'all ain't saying nothing to me. Woo,
Okay.
my God,
Okay.
today. Yes, sir. To the church. And so
To the church.
yeah. And they've gone on to do other things. However, that influence doesn't leave. The metaphysical part of what music does to the brain
Okay.
is an amazing thing to learn about, and how that's how it is. We can listen to songs from 40 years ago, those of us that are over 40, uh, and still know every twist, every turn, when the instrumental part is going to come in, when the interlude is going to come in, when the drummer is going to do the fill, because of that it makes in our brains. So that
That's
doesn't
true.
go away from these people who
That's
have
true.
been raised in the church.
That is true. I remember, God bless her, Maggie Ingram out of Richmond,
Whew,
Virginia.
yes.
And I was doing a morning show, and her daughters brought her by to talk with me, and she was ill at the time, and she wasn't. You could tell she was. They had to guide her and everything.
Mhm.
The moment that music came on,
Listen.
Miss Maggie turned into Miss Maggie Ingram. Do you
Crushed
hear
it.
me?
Yes,
she
ma'am.
did.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It is really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So along the same lines, is there a difference between the way churches celebrate music? For instance, do churches in the North use the same instruments during worship that churches in the South would? Do churches in the East have the same style of performances as churches in the West?
Well, I traveling with the Norfolk State University Concert Choir and many different edifices that we visit, and from Episcopal churches, Presbyterian to a Church of God in Christ, and to then the Baptist traditional church. Some churches we go to, you'll see a Hammond organ.
Yes.
Some churches you go to, you see keyboards. Some churches you go to, more along the Catholic or the Episcopal or Presbyterian side, you'll see a pipe organ.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an adaptation, again, I guess, as Dr. Thornton so eloquently said, is about what works best for that house. As Patrick said as well, what works best for that location or that particular church.
For that denomination, or for that
both
house?
both
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Because there is a culture in the Catholic and Episcopal and Presbyterian church, even a music culture that a B3 probably wouldn't accommodate.
That's right.
And there is a culture in, let's say, for instance, a Progressive Baptist church or a Church of God in Christ, that the pipe organ is just not going to accommodate.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there are different. There's a difference in the worship culture. Many times, it's getting less and less, but many times, according to denomination, as you mentioned. However, those lines are really disappearing, and even as the independent churches are on the rise, we're grabbing things from everybody's culture to make sure that the culture that we establish for our own church is the one that we want.
Okay.
And let me say this while we're on that subject. You know, some people are stuck with hymns. Some people are stuck with praise and worship teams. Some people have eliminated their choirs. I think it's a mistake to eliminate anything. I think that if we have the personnel, we should try to present to the congregation different types of music, the CCM, the praise and worship, the gospel, the contemporary, the traditional, the anthem, the spiritual, all of that, if we can be a part of the worship experience, because it gives us the opportunity to touch everybody in the congregation.
Phil, I'm thinking about you as senior vice president there at Capitol Records. When the records come to you, are you embracing all types of gospel? Are you listening to the quartets? Are you listening to the contemporary? Are you listening to the traditional?
Well, before I answer that question, Cheryl, I got to just echo Pastor Britt's position on the choirs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a member of Mount Zion Baptist Church here in Nashville, Tennessee. Bishop Joseph Walker, my pastor. I miss the choirs. I love my praise team. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
Love my praise team. That's a nice, but there's nothing like a choir at church. I feel like many churches have gotten away from that for, I'm sure, different reasons. But personally, I just miss seeing the choir, the youth choir, the women's choir, the men's choir. It was such a part of the experience of church. But to answer your question, Cheryl, as far as I listen to it all, now the challenge is working for a label that is also publicly traded. I work for Capitol, which is under Universal Music Group. There's a balance of, I'm excited about the art, the ministry aspect. However, there's the fiscal aspect that my corporate partners are, more passionate about. So it's like finding that balance of ministry and fiscal responsibility. So yes, do I listen to it all? Yes, have over the years of working at Sony prior to being here at Capitol and before that E1, I've worked with artists, whether they were quartet, choir masters, more contemporary. I've worked with everybody from Shirley Caesar to Kirk Franklin to Corinne Hawthorne to Travis Green. I've worked with all of them and signed quite a few of them. But the reality is it's changing. And so now it's becoming a numbers game, and people want to see
Mm-hmm.
what's streaming, what's bubbling on TikTok. And
Right.
unfortunately, sometimes the more traditional side of gospel may not resonate in the same way digitally. But to me, it doesn't mean that it's less viable. But for some, that is the case. But to answer your question, I listen to it all, and I've signed all types of gospel.
Patrick Riddick of Divine Worship had this to say about the possible differences.
I don't want to say that they celebrate the music differently. I think that everybody just they may have their own signature or their own style and sound. Each area or each region has its style. If you go down to the South, like towards the Carolinas, and you start getting into South Carolina, they call it low country church. Man, they have steel guitars and they use trombones, and it's the same way, but they just have their own way of doing it, where they might add an element there that we typically won't do here in Virginia. In Virginia, we're like Chicago and Detroit. We love our gospel music to be organ heavy, a lot of Hammond organ with a great bass player and drums.
That's right. And minister and recording artist Earl Bynum, he had interesting comparisons about how churches have changed as far as the gospel is concerned.
I think it's growth. I think it's shift. And I think all of it together can fit in what I would call the gumbo pot.
And that's what you all are saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Terry.
But one of the things I agree with the fact that choirs have somewhat died away, or if you will, are not there anymore. But then two quick things on that. Some students nowadays, until it's introduced to them, when they hear a choir, they think old.
Because
Just old. You don't see choirs anymore. The majority, not all. I can speak from what I'm seeing, are with praise teams or one or two soloists, and then that's it.
But why can't we have the praise team start the service and then we have the choir? Why can't we have this gumbo part?
That's going to the next part, where I think then it lies into the expertise, in my humble opinion, when in some of these churches where you don't have some of those persons in place that can then get together a choir of 10, 15, 30, 40 persons, then do you have as you said, the resources, the personnel that can actually sing a bass, tenor, alto, and a soprano part in division, or will you have two parts? Now you're talking about it's limited on what music you can perform if the expertise is not there and the voices and talent level is not there.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
I agree. I agree. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Mm-hmm. Can I get an amen?
But then that's another question.
And whatever kind of leadership it is, and I'm talking about musical leadership, I'm talking about pastoral leadership, I'm talking about denominational leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership, and so whose ever hands you put those in, those areas in, if that leadership is not strong enough to either teach and do that thing, or at least have a vision for how that's supposed to go, then here we are with no choirs, so to speak. I'm just making a pejorative statement, but here we are when the choirs used to be part of the attraction of a ministry.
Correct. I remember my home church in Richmond, Virginia, Quagerson Baptist Church. That choir stand was full, but Mr. David Forbes would come in and you learned every part to those songs, and those sections went through it until they got it correct.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Cheryl, we got, and this is one of the few times you hear me give, a shout out in this regard, but Kanye West, I have to give credit what he did with Sunday service and assembling that choir of young people just a few years ago. It shows you that choirs are still very much a part of the musical fabric.
Exactly.
Of American music. Gospel music is American music and is global. But again, Kanye demonstrated that choirs were still, and again, of all people to demonstrate, but you hear me out, like you can't knock his musical prowess and genius. But the thing is, the choirs were at the center of what he was doing, and he had these people singing around the world. Choir.
Exactly. That he lent his visibility to a choir's viability.
There you go. I love that.
Preach, baby.
You understand? Definitely, because he's a recognizable person.
Yes, ma'am.
But what is this recognizable person doing?
Doing.
And okay, so then if he's doing that and he's who he is, then let's do that.
Mhm,
You know?
mhm.
So yeah.
I love it. I can't sing a lick, but I can hear. And when I hear those different parts and those melodies, when I hear those chants, when I hear those, all Mr. Forbes taught all of that kind of stuff. And you miss it and you get goosebumps. Well, I do anyway. And the older people will tell you that you have to have hymns because the hymns came from the word. So you would stand on that word that was sung through that hymn.
That's my thing. Man, please don't get rid of those hymns.
Yeah.
Please don't. When you
On
said
Christ the solid rock, I stand.
Come on here. It is well with my soul.
Philip Bliss.
Yeah.
Come
Yes,
on.
That's it.
But
So
listen, Cheryl, can I say this?
yes.
This is why I'm tickled over here on this microphone. And listen, I know this is like way left for y'all that's gonna hear this, but y'all gotta hear me out. I'm looking at you. I heard you say I can't sing a lick.
And people that can sing always say other people can't sing. Can sing. We can't sing. Everybody can't do everything, okay?
But
I can't sing.
Every time I hear somebody say that, I think back to this episode of Andy Griffith that I saw when they was trying to put Barney out of the they was trying to put Barney out of the choir. Baby, that is the funniest thing I've ever seen. And they went to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was trying to keep her. And she said, she said, they asked her, "Can Barney sing?" She said, "He can't sing a lick."
And that's how I feel about it.
I like
so
that.
WNSB, we've gathered these distinguished guests today, Minister Peggy Britt, Professor Terry Butler, and by phone music executive Phil Thornton. We're talking about the relationship between gospel songs and sermons. I remind you that coming up on February the 12th and the 13th on WHRO Public TV, it's a very important docuseries entitled Gospel. And Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., he will serve as the executive producer. He's the host. He's the writer of the docuseries. There's so much more to discuss, so stay with us. We are Hot 91, the soul of VA.
Let us forever remember the struggle of our forefathers and the legacy that demands that we continue that fight.
Welcome back. Minister Peggy Britt, you know that song?
A little bit.
Tell us
A
about
little
that.
bit.
What do you know about that?
Oh man, I arranged that so long ago, and I just wanted another generation to know the words to that song.
Yes.
Because the words are very, very powerful. And unfortunately, we've gotten used to people just dropping the beat and not paying attention to lyrics. But I'm a very lyric-driven writer, so I wanted people to know and lift every voice and sing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So today we're examining the relationship between Black spirituality and sermons. That's because Professor Louis Henry Gates Jr. has written and produced a docuseries, Gospel. Don't miss the program again. It's February the 12th and the 13th, right? Right here in Hampton Roads on WRO Public TV. I have so many questions for you all. I called on one of the directors. Her name is Stacy Holman, because I wanted to ask her, did she have to keep her emotions in check when she was creating this docuseries? And I just wanted her thoughts on what went into it emotionally for her, and had to say.
2 songs we had with a choir. Other songs were a duet between Felice and Corey Henry, and another with Felice and Alexis. And just hearing, it's one thing to hear the recording, but to hear that gospel sound live was, I wanted to just sit and listen to it over and over and over again and just get lost in it.
Yeah, I asked that question because gospel music is powerful. It's moving. It can bring you from your deepest despair. So, Phil, as a music director, as a music executive, is that something that you keep front and center when you are thinking about whether or not to green light a gospel song?
It's challenging because I like to respect the songwriter, and some are more biblically sound than others.
Okay.
So, like, for example, like I've worked with Donald Lawrence, and he's very biblically sound in a lot of his lyrics and songs. And I've worked with Donnie McClurkin, very, also as well. But then some of my more younger artists on the roster may have a different interpretation. Doesn't make it bad. It's just I still like to make sure I'll send it to, like, maybe a consultant to make sure that just, hey, is this in line with the word? Or even I've utilized my own pastor. Like when I did a gospel album with Snoop Dogg a few years ago, and even that was one that I was excited about the opportunity because it was a bridge project to me, but I also wanted to make sure that everything was in line the way it needed to be.
That's right. That's right. Now,
my Joseph Walker, I tell you, I've called him many times to say, hey, Bishop, can you put your ears on this? I'm going to send you a lyric sheet. Can you just make sure? And there's others in my circle that I've also leaned on just to make sure, because it's important what we're putting out into the world as record labels. We can't just, that's a great responsibility, and I take it very seriously. So.
Wow. Listen, can I just interject this, please? I have the utmost respect for you in your position, sir, because not only are you an executive, but you are a believer. Correct. You are a member of a church who pays attention to their pastor. And with all of that being a part of your consciousness as you're having to make those kinds of decisions cannot be easy. So, sir, my hat's off to you.
Thank you, Pastor Brace. That means a lot coming from you, someone who I'm from Virginia as well. I followed your career. And Missy and I have talked about you a number of times as well. So, yeah, thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Absolutely.
I touched on this next question a little bit earlier, but I want to kind of dig into it. I've heard the elders say that the sermons and the songs of old are based on scripture, whereas the contemporary songs of today are based on feelings. So if that's true, is one way right and the other way wrong? Or are they both right? Are they both wrong? Or who wants to put their foot into that one?
Again, I'll just say, if you will, it depends on what house or where you are, in my humble opinion. Again, for example, we go through a lot of anthems here at Norfolk State University with our choir. We sing high feast anthems, things that they would sing when the king or queen is being crowned and so forth. But then that same text can go then from there to a wonderful setting of a motet during the Baroque period, but then transitioning on now to then using that same type of harmonization with an opening to a gospel selection that maybe Richard Smallwood might have arranged with a classical background. Mm-hmm. Then they can accept it that way because Mr. Smallwood has a huge classical background. So again, I think.
But those are music students.
Right.
What about the world?
Then it would depend on the house and the upbringing from home all the way to the church.
The line there, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily a right or wrong line, because double for this. If you are a believer and you have a personal relationship and you yourself are in your word, guess what the word does? The word makes you feel
okay, I'm with you.
A kind of way.
I can get that.
You understand? Mm-hmm. And that's why the Psalms are so wonderful to study and to meditate on, because David will take you from the depths of despair to the mountain of victory and celebration. And so when you have a scriptural base, and I'm glad you mentioned Donald Lawrence, because I just love him.
So many people
do. And his approach. When you have a scriptural base, and then you're able to wrap a great song around that scriptural base because you've been gifted to do so, then it's going to make you feel a kind of way. Okay. And whether that's a way of repentance or a way of joy, whatever that is, it's going to stir up some kind of emotion. And that's what the whole industry, the recording industry does. It gives us the soundtrack of how we're feeling.
Is that what you do, Phil?
That's the goal. Every day I walk into the office, it's the goal, and it's not an easy goal to achieve. Again, working with people like Donald and Pastor McClurkin and Fred Hammond and so many, and Kirk Franklin, like they have a certain grasp. But then some of my young artists, like Corinne Hawthorne, who I signed, she had a song called "Won't He Do It." Although we didn't have a scriptural base for the song, it was still, she's still saying Jesus in the song. She's not being ambiguous like some songs we heard, he and him. Like, she was very bold in her approach, but it was her interpretation and how she, as at the time 18-year-old, communicates with God and just what He brought her through. So I can appreciate both. I don't think, to Pastor Britt's point, I don't think it's a right or wrong, but it's about the approach and it's about the feeling. But I'm a supporter of both when it's coming from that right place.
When Dr. Thornton talked about the streaming part,
Yes.
I remember one time, maybe especially during the COVID, coming out of COVID, whenever COVID was, whatever COVID was, Jonathan McReynolds would do an Instagram live.
Donate to the fund.
And it would be a bunch of persons that would get up there, and he would ask for the listeners there to just give me a word that I can write a song about. And they would just give him the weirdest words. But some of them, and some of those persons there, if I may say, maybe a young lady or two were interested in Jonathan, but they would give him a word, and then he would turn that word into a song.
So is it cool to meet here?
It was amazing. So then he would then write for exactly right. So, but he was using the audience to help him. What is it that you all like? And then once the word comes and they like it, then he would just immediately do a melody straight from that word, turn it into something scriptural based, and then everybody on the screen loved it. Said, "Would you all buy this?" Yes, and then he went on board.
Absolutely.
Did something come from that?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall, but I'm sure he stays in tune with a lot of his audience. I know a lot with Instagram at times, and he asks for those kinds of things, a statement, give me a sentence, and he just writes something off of that right there in front of you. And I thought that was brilliant.
Have you ever done that, Pastor Britt?
Yeah, I did it at a function that I served for a women's function, and somebody said something, and as a songwriter, whenever it hits you, and you got to get a piece of paper, you got to get your phone, you got to do something, you got to catch it. I think I got a whole lot of hits in the trash can because I didn't write it down. But yeah, absolutely. When you've been gifted to write songs, almost anything that comes your way, you can tune it up.
So amazed by that. Another producer of the show, Sheila Harris, spoke to me about whether things went as planned when making gospel, or did they have to pivot at any time to bring the whole project to television?
We came up with some
that was in
solutions
the main
to immerse the audience in those moments. We see
Friday
live
at 12 noon.
performances by choir and by incredible artists, musicians, and so we really hope that people will really feel the difference, feel that immersion in.
And so, here's a question that it's a simple question, and we kind of talked on it. We kind of talked advanced on it before, but it's something to think about. Every time one hears a gospel song or hears a gospel sermon, did you always feel something?
YouTube, Facebook, Instagram,
Always,
Twitter, all at the same
should
time.
something come from you? The scripture says His word should never return void. In other words, His word will ultimately accomplish whatever He intends it. But as human beings, do we really believe and feel that with every song, every sermon, that it will move us? I have to tell y'all, I'm a church song, and church is looking for a pastor.
Oh, my man, Presbyterian, what are we doing? 24 now. You Presbyterian? 24 now with the talent.
But when I walked out, I
Y'all could at
was.
least brought some wings.
Look,
It's
yeah,
just me and Kanye.
there's a lot that goes.
It's just me and Kanye
into
out
that.
here, man. That's it.
It's not always you. It's not always them. It's something that is rather ethereal
On top.
and more I think spiritual and or emotionally based, because sometimes you'll get something, and sometimes you get something new. Sometimes you won't get something new, but you'll get a reminder of something that you already know. And I think the way that our society is so hooked on instant gratification,
Yes.
that sometimes we look to come out of the church jumping across pews every Sunday. It's just not going to happen. And it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you didn't get anything, because sometimes what you get is down the road. It's in you. That's why it's so important to sit under the word so that it can get in you. Is it going to work tomorrow? Maybe not. But what about 4 months down the road when somebody cuts you off in traffic? Maybe it'll work that day.
Maybe it'll work that day. Has that
That
ever
day.
happened to you, Phil, where you left and you're glad you went, you had a fine time, but it wasn't what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there. I mean, and I'm completely fine with it because I don't expect every Sunday has to be this big event. You know, sometimes it may be just the message that impacts me a bit differently than what because of what I'm going through in that chapter of my life. So, sometimes, I've went to Bill Winston's church in Chicago or Tony Evans in Texas, and it's more about the word. And again, there's a musical component as well, but sometimes I really just want the word. And again, nothing against the music because it's a part of the overall experience. But sometimes it's okay. So when, and sometimes it's a song that cuts through in a different kind of way because again, what I'm going through or what I'm, have gone through or about to go through, it's just like, so it really just depends. But yeah, I don't expect, that's not fair to me. That's also not fair to the church and the team there. It's not every Sunday you're going to leave on this, this euphoria, this high, like every single Sunday. That's not fair to everybody.
Yeah, that's what I meant. It's just not going to be like that way every Sunday. Sometimes you can leave and you'll be crying and you'll be crying all the way home in the car, and because it just has had that kind of impact. But who's not to wait a minute? Who's not to say that impact that you had at that moment is the result of those smaller impacts that you weren't even aware of that have piled up into that cry? You understand what I'm saying?
And sometimes that cry is a happy cry. Everybody assumes
it's
a sad cry. Sometimes it's a joyful cry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I talked to Stacey Holman again. She's the director and producer of Gospel, which is coming up February 12th and 13th. Check it out on WHRO. And I asked her what specific stories she wanted to share within the series.
Not really the lesser known stories that people don't really know or people don't really aren't aware of, and specifically stories of women.
Stories of women. So let's talk about that. Okay. How important have Black women been in the church? In the Bible, you got Sarah, you got Rachel, you got Hagar. The list goes on and on. But have you looked at Black women as pillars of Black spirituality?
You asking me?
I am.
Are you kidding me? Absolutely. Absolutely. We have been the backbone and in the background, but not so much in supporting what our hardworking men do. And not only that, but some of the things that we even do on our own to add to the uplifting of our culture is, I'm glad that Stacey, I hope she doesn't mind me calling her by her first name, that it is uncovering that, so to speak, because I think that is some of the forgotten part of our history that should be exposed so that other people of this generation and beyond can begin to have the confidence to know that we are world changers. No matter how you cut it, we're world changers.
Phil, how does that work within the industry of being a record executive? Is it men gospel heavy, or is it women gospel heavy, or is there a balance?
I think that varies from, roster to roster. I've been very intentional in every label I've been at this point. This is the third one at this point, but at each company, I'm very intentional about to make sure we have gender balance. Like that's to me, it would be egregious just to have it an all male roster. But like I said, I've worked with Shirley Caesar, I've worked with Erica Campbell. When I was at Sony, I had at the same time on the roster, Leandria Johnson, Corinne Hawthorne, Joe, Kiara Sheard. But in the company before that, I had Karen and Brenda and Shirley and Erica all on the same roster. Now we have Tasha Cobbs Leonard and Evie McKinney, and a few new signings that are not as well known. But again, we have to be intentional. So it can be male dominated in some ways, but again, the women are the cornerstone of gospel music and of this country and this world, for that matter. So it has to be reflective in gospel music to me, and that's not only the artist side, but also behind the scenes. Like whether you're a writer, like I have a number of songwriters that are women that I work with on a consistent basis, engineers. Like it's not to me just one specific area. We have to be intentional, and then I must acknowledge that one of my favorite executives who really blazed the trails in gospel music 30 plus years ago is a woman named Vicki Maglation, who founded Gospel Centric, which is why we know Kirk Franklin and Donnie McClurkin and Byron Cage and so many others. But that is a woman, but more specifically, a Black woman who had a vision and really set out a plan and made significant strides. And is one of the main reasons I'm sitting here on this phone talking with you today, because she laid the groundwork.
I thank you for mentioning her. I had the great privilege of meeting her at a function that we had here a few months ago for the Gospel Music Alliance. It wasn't like a convention, but it was a gathering. I don't know what. Yeah. And I had the opportunity to meet her, and I love her and Claude, and definitely what she did as a female, as a Black female for gospel music, it was unprecedented, and I haven't seen it done since. I don't know, maybe there's some others that are behind the scenes, but definitely Vicki is a favorite of mine because she kind of dug it out.
Wonderful.
She did. And with a staff of mostly Black women as well, Pastor Brent. That was the other thing that was special about Gospel Centric. A lot of not all, but the majority of the staff was all young, powerful Black women that are still around in the industry to this day. But kudos to Vicki Maglation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this PBS special, it's entitled Gospel. If you're just joining us, it's dynamic, it's moving, it's powerful. What should the legacy?
That's good stuff. We're going to be in the recording studio for a couple hours.
An appreciation for this extremely unique African-American art form that isn't just church music, but really inspired a freedom movement, has inspired pop culture, and really coalesces how the African-American community has infused faith and hope into their journey.
And just quickly, I want to slide in here, Minister Earl Bynum. He had some thoughts on legacy, and I want you all to hear what he had to say.
The foundation of how it all started. And I think we have to look at that by going as far back as the late Thomas Dorsey. And then we went from Thomas Dorsey starting his convention and starting with the Precious Lord and the passing of his wife and writing that song. But then we have to include also the late, great James Cleveland, who started the Gospel Music Workshop of America. But then we can go over to the Church of God in Christ with the Clark sisters' mother, Dr. Mittie Moss Clark. So it's so many facets.
So many facets that we should think about when we are talking about legacy. And, I would like to hear from you, Pastor Brett.
Mm-hmm.
What should the legacy of gospel
I think it's so funny you mentioned legacy, because the other ministry that I have, that is financial services, talks about the same thing, about legacy. What does that mean? That means that for the next few generations, or for the next generations, not even few, but for the next generations, there is a remembrance of what it has taken to get us where we are. And there is a passion for keeping that memory alive so as not to lose what it has imparted to who we have become. That's very, very important. Financially, that's important for legacy. We don't talk about it a lot in our community, but I hope that we start. But musically, definitely, because this is something that has been inherent. I was talking to a guy who's producing a track for me now yesterday, and he was talking about we were saying something along those lines, and what we were saying was the things that we were as a people born with, we have kind of taken for granted, and we have watched other ethnicities, no disrespect to them, but to come in and to master what was natural for us. And so legacy, in my view, is very important that people understand where that came from, that it came from us first.
Have to acknowledge that. Phil, in your line of work, what is the legacy of gospel music?
Just continue to create an avenue and an outlet to share the gospel on a global level. Like that to me, personally, as well as professionally, is extremely important because, as it was previously mentioned, gospel is the foundation for every genre. Let's start there. So whether you jazz, blues, country, rock and roll, R&B, hip hop, whatever, it all started with gospel. And that's something that I constantly remind my peers and our corporate partners. Like, so just making sure that we continue to properly resource, support, and just create a global platform for this music that is not, it's gospel music, but it's American music, it's global music. And it's something that's super necessary to inspire the world and continue to provide hope. So that's my desire. And from a label side, it's imperative. We have to just keep it going and keep it resourced and keep supporting, keep streaming, keep downloading, whatever. If you still buy physical CDs where you can find them, whatever we can do to continue to support, because it's important that gospel lives on, because it has, and it is the foundation for all forms of music. And it's just important that we continue to keep it alive.
I am so grateful, sir, that you are sitting in the seat that you're sitting in with the mindset that you have. I can't tell you. I hope to.
What you expect? He's from Norfolk.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about. But I just, man, listen.
And Pastor Brett, I'm friends with Juwan, your son Boo, as well. We go back from when I was a teenager. He can tell you about me. So
get out of here.
Yeah,
absolutely. That, of course, you know that's my guy. But
yes, smile on her face is just as big as it can be. Yes.
But to have you to feel that way and to sit in the seat that you're sitting is going to make a huge difference in our legacy, because people that sit where you sit are able to facilitate the fact that we will have legacy and that we will have the remembrance of what has happened, so that we can not let it go and keep that passion going. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Bill is something else. Like I said, he started here in Norfolk, and just his travels and the lives he's touched, it is wonderful. Just as yourself, I'm old school.
Yeah.
I like the old school way of things. And to see you all standing strong and, like you say, doing the right thing, that means a lot. You are in